Good evening and welcome to The Right Side, the show where we talk about today's news, views, trends, and opinions from an admittedly conservative perspective. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and this evening we're joined once again by nationally known and requested speaker and commentator Bill Whittle. Bill, thanks for coming back to Northern California to spend some time with us.
It's a pleasure, Chris. It's great. I thought my skin would catch fire when I walked into San Francisco airport, but it turns out I survived the experience intact.
Well, the flaming darts didn't catch you. That was what it really was. Yeah, we actually had interviewed Sheriff Joe Arpaio several months back, and he complained that our protesters were just not anywhere near what he expected.
No.
So you got to let down.
Yeah, that's okay. We'll soldier on.
So talk to us a little bit about what you're doing in the area. You're going to be speaking tonight at the Conservative Forum, and you're going to be talking about free markets and translating them to modern English.
Well, not so much free markets. I think what we're calling it is millennial messaging, and I think really the guts of what we're trying to do is to kind of get past this conservative. It's a hang-up. I understand why it's a hang-up, but the short form is, when you try to talk to young people about conservative values, we want to go back to where the values came from, which is the founders and the constitutions nearly 250 years ago.
Right.
And so we talk about, we'll often have things like red, white, and blue banners, and we'll have, we'll have quills and scrolls and parchment. We'll have "We the People" written out, and we'll have Gadsden flag with a snake on it, and a guy dressed up as, George Washington and stuff. And you go to young people with this, and they kind of think you're nuts, because they've been deprived of the education that would connect them to who these people actually are. And since they can't connect to who they actually are, all they're left with is the frame, which is the costume, which is, you seriously are trying to sell us powdered wigs and waistcoats and leg stockings and muskets and a flag with a snake on it? Honestly, that's really what you... I mean, we're 21st century, kids. We're not interested in stuff that happened 250 years ago.
Right.
So the challenge is to take these conservative values and put them in black Helvetica on a white background to make it look like an Apple ad, because then it's something that they can that draws their eye and engages them in the idea that this is something kind of new and modern and hip. Because it is. Because it actually is. Because
those documents that were generated long ago in the founding of the country isn't a dead thing for old rich white guys?
No, it's
living
deeper.
and breathing
It's deeper than that. It's not just that these documents. See, I have a reverential view of the Constitution. I actually have a religious view of the Constitution. I'm not a terribly religious person, but I'm in that kind of awe.
So did the guys who wrote it. They had a religious...
I'm in awe of it. But for example, when you think about these guys, the founding fathers, the founding fathers came down on wires from heaven, and they're all clouded in a nimbus of glory, and these guys must have sat there and said, surely the king will send a duke or an earl or a governor, and he'll get all this stuff straightened out. And they're looking around, and she's like, no, it's just us. It's a silversmith and a brewer and a smuggler and a farmer and a small town lawyer. No, this can't depend on us. Surely somebody who knows what they're doing is going to come. Because that's who these guys were. They were crackpot inventor, right? A farmer, a lawyer, a silversmith, Paul Revere, a brewer, John, the other Adams. So there's this realization that if you peel away sort of the deification of this thing, you realize you got just a bunch of guys who are like going, well, somebody's got to do something about this, and they come up with the only... It's not a perfect system of government. It's just the best. It's just the best it's ever been. But these guys never thought they were going to win, and they certainly didn't have this predestined idea that this is going to be handed down in glory. And for example, that's the problem with the way we look at the founders, is we tell the story backwards. We tell the story from all of its achievements and all of its flags on the moon and all this prosperity, and walk it back and say, well, these guys were divinely inspired. They flew in on wires from heaven. No, they were regular people who were really worried, and must have said to themselves, surely better people than us are going to come and fix this problem. But no, it's just us.
So what's the alternative? How do we make that cool? How do we make it hip, modern? How do we make it interesting so that people will pursue it?
I can give you one really simple example. I really like flying Virgin American Airlines. The first time I flew a Virgin American flight, I walked into an airplane. It was at Red Eye, and it didn't feel like an airplane. It felt like a nightclub. It was red and purple lighting with black leather and white plastic seats, and they were playing really happening kind of light jazz music. It wasn't an airplane. It was like walking into a nightclub. I thought, this is different. About a year and a half ago, they came up with the safety video for Virgin America. and I think they spent a couple $1 million on it. And instead of taking place inside an airplane with a flight attendant doing this, they made it a musical number in a giant hangar, huge open space with these kind of ribs to suggest the outline of the airplane and little panels to suggest the windows. It's 4.5 minutes long. I personally have watched it 15 times. It's got 12 million views on YouTube. And here's what interested me about this. First of all, this is the most boring information known to man. How do you operate a seatbelt? I already know how to do that. And not only is it the most boring information known to man, but it's the most boring information known to man that I've heard personally 300 times in the same order. And what they were able to do with this video was they were able to make it so interesting and so sexy and so cool and so fun that I would get off a Virgin America flight, go home, get on YouTube, put the headphones on so I could hear it again because I loved it so much.
Instead of ignoring it.
Precisely. Now, a few months ago, or a couple months ago, somebody said, Bill, why don't you do a video about your top 5 conservative principles? It was about 11 minutes of me standing doing my thing. And I realized, no, I just watched a video of people explaining 5 basic concepts. Here's how you operate a seatbelt. Here's how you inflate a life vest. Here's how you don't mess with the smoke detectors. Here's how you get out of an airplane. And I thought, no, it's sexy, it's interesting, it's dynamic, the music is it's awesome, it's cool. If I could take 5 conservative principles, boil them down to 40 seconds per beat, weave a theme within it, have the hottest dancers in LA, and I'm telling you there are a few of them out there, and make sure that nobody in that video is over 30, then you've got the message. Now, I'll give you a concrete example of that. We talked about George Washington and this idea that when we go to millennials and young people, we give them founding fathers, and we give them flag banners, and we give them scrolls, and we the people, and parchment, and the flag. And the thing. When you talk to young people, I had this experience talking to a high school group. I said, "What if you could describe George Washington? What would he look like?" And they'd tell you. Powdered wig, waistcoat, fluffy collar, tricorner hat, stockings, musket, maybe. And I said, yeah, that's pretty much it. But that's not who George Washington was to the people that knew George Washington. That's how he looks 250 years later. You're going to look plenty stupid 250 years from now, rest assured. So, what did George Washington look like to the people who knew George Washington? Well, during the Revolutionary War, George Washington sent a letter behind lines to the British, to a tailor in London, secret message. And the secret message was to the top tailor in London. He said, I would like to purchase 4 waistcoats of the most contemporary design. I'd like to use the most fashionable colors currently available, and I'd like the buttons to be as ornate as they can be without appearing ostentatious. So why is the man who's engaged with the war and the British sending this message to this tailor? And the answer is, Chris, is because George Washington was the best dressed man in the world.
So pimp my general.
He was the best, yes, he was the best dressed man on planet Earth. So if George Washington were sitting in this room with us today, he wouldn't be wearing a waistcoat and powdered wig and stockings. He'd be in a $12,000 Armani suit. He'd have a $900 Hermes shirt. He'd have $2,000 cufflinks. He'd have a $9,000 watch. He'd have $2,000 shoes, a $900 haircut, and he wouldn't be holding a musket. He'd be holding an AR-15 with a laser target designator because he was a swinging, deadly, bitchin' dude. And people looked at him like he was a god. He was 6'4". That'd be like 6'6" today. So if I was telling the story of George Washington, I would do it with these incredible dancers. I'd have a guy who had the powdered wig and the whole thing. I'd have him standing there. I'd have 3 of the hottest babes in the world come up behind him. I'd have a breakaway costume. They would just rip this thing off of him, and there would stand a 6'6" guy who's absolutely ripped in boxer briefs, and they would put they'd put these Hermes shirt on him. He'd do the James Bond cufflink kind of pull. They'd put a $20,000 suit on him. They'd moose up his hair, give him a little bed hair, and then I would say, that's who George Washington is.
And his horse would be a Ferrari?
Well, if you want to bring the horse into it, yeah, exactly. That's who he is. Right. It's not who he was, it's who he is. If he were here today, that's how he dressed today. And all of a sudden, when you do that, all of a sudden, young people start to get it. So it's not an old guy with old ideas and who's just kind of, no. He was the best dressed, deadliest dude in the world. People wanted to make him king. He was every pop star rolled into one, and he looked like money. And that's how I do it. And I would have, hot dancers putting that stuff in his hair and putting his people see things differently then.
Yeah, because it makes it real. It makes it, like you said, contemporary. It's
now.
And so, I mean, what are the top 5 concepts that you would dedicate those 40 seconds each to?
Let's take guns, for example. Guns was one of the 5 for me. When conservatives talk about guns, we have arguments about how many rounds should be in a magazine. If I were doing it on that stage in that musical number, I would have
babes with guns.
I'd have a young woman. I'd have a young 29-year-old mom and her little daughter, and I'd have 3 big guys, one pointing a gun, and they'd be pushing her backwards. They would just have a gun at her, and they'd walk her back. Big guys intimidating her. So some people think that guns are bad because guns do bad things. And then the second I said that, they're off frame by now. Then I'd have the one woman with the gun backing up the 3 big guys the other directions. Some people think guns are good because they do good things. Guns don't care. Guns as inanimate as this table, right? What the purpose of the weapon is. We believe that it's better for a 90-pound woman to be able to survive a walk to a parking lot at 2 o'clock in the morning and not be a statistic and not be a chalk outline on the ground for my moral superiority at somebody's cocktail party in Berkeley. I think that woman's right to go home is more important than my ability to show everybody what a grand person I am by being against these god-awful vicious guns. Right. By showing that this interplay works both ways, you're saying this is an inanimate object. It's an object that allows a 90-pound woman to defeat 3 professionally violent large men and not be a statistic. Because when you get right down to it, the reason I'm so deeply committed to these conservative values is because I celebrate the diversity so much. Oh, you don't have Republicans in diversity? No. When we talk about diversity, we're not talking about African Americans and Hispanic Americans and homosexual Americans or female Americans. When we talk about diversity, we talk about the only diversity that actually matters, and that's the diversity of the individual person. That's it, and that's all. Mm-hmm. What do you think of black people? Which one? Who are you talking about? Mm-hmm. I know great black people and awful black people. I know great gay people and awful gay people and great white people, awful white people. Who are you talking about as an individual? Right. That's diversity. And I think that person has a right to go home. And I think that it's not up to me to be able to say, no, you can't defend yourself, because I find that morally repugnant that people should have handguns. Right. The guns don't care.
And what are the other topics? I mean, hopefully capitalism's in there somewhere.
Sure. Capitalism, we've been bombarded with movies where the big reveal is it's a evil corporation testing drugs out on innocent third world people, or it's an evil corporation that's set up a collapse in a mine because it gets more money by the insurance payments. Or an evil corporation that does this, evil corporation does that, blah, 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 blah. But the fact of the matter is, you may hate Walmart and you may hate McDonald's, but you know what? You don't have to go to Walmart or McDonald's, because there's no Walmart police that comes by and rounds you up and shakes the money out of you, makes you go to Walmart.
We only do that with healthcare.
That's exactly right. So if you don't like Walmart, don't go to Walmart. If you don't like McDonald's, don't go to McDonald's. The reason they're so rich is because people voluntarily provide them with their money in exchange for value. Now, the government, on the other hand, if you don't like what the government is doing and you don't want to pay them, then sooner or later, men with guns will show up and take your money by force. They will. That's the end result of not paying your taxes or doing any of the other stuff that they don't want. So you can start out by saying that the primary benefit to capitalism is it's voluntarily. Nobody's making you do anything you don't want to do. You don't want to buy the stuff, don't buy it. Right. I had a friend who was in Budapest in late 80s. She's an actress, and she was in a 5-star restaurant in Budapest, and she just asked for some butter for a roll. She said, we don't have butter until the butter doesn't arrive till Saturday. We have butter 2 days a week. This is at the top restaurant in a communist country for visiting American celebrities. I just got back from Las Vegas, where people live like kings. There's not a pasha or an emir or a sultan in the world who could live the way you live in a regular room at the Bellagio for 2 days. Now, I'm not saying that the poorest Americans get to live in Vegas, but if you have a job in this country and you decide to save your money, you can live like a sultan for a couple of days in Las Vegas and be surrounded by the kind of luxury that's unimaginable, because of what happens when people are motivated to do extra work more than they need to in order to get a little extra reward.
And so this messaging stuff is obviously at the top of your mind. What are you going to do with it?
Well, I might actually do that video. I really want to. I want to do a video like that, because I want people to understand certain things about this message. I found out late in life that I actually can sing a little. Not great, but a little. I can play drums. Nobody would expect that about me. Nobody would expect that about me, and nobody would expect that we would be able to put these messages in the way that any message. Forget about the left political message. If I want to sell shoes, if I want to sell cars, if I want to sell anything, I got to put in the elements that make the sales attractive. And if I want to sell these ideas, all of a sudden we're supposed to stop doing this, and I'm supposed to stand in front of a marble column and start reciting statistics and Aristotle. No, if I want to sell something to 18-year-old boys, I'm going to trot out some dancers, and I'm going to trot out some action, and I'm going to trot out a cut rate where I'm not on a shot more than 20, 30 frames. And I'm going to put it in a way that makes it accessible to them, because for the first time ever, they'll get to hear it. And once they hear it, then it's game over for the left.
Hit the audience where they are.
They have the worst message in the best package, and we've got the best message in the worst package. We have a Cartier diamond for philosophy, and we're putting it in a Kentucky Fried Chicken box, and we're wondering why nobody's buying it.
Yeah. It's a charity case, basically, for the way that conservative messages have been put out there. So you're looking at doing that movie. Are you going to be doing that kind of a video? Do you have a lot of them that you're planning to do? Or
that video would actually be a bit of a diversion for me. This year, we're going to start with our first feature film, probably $1 million, $1.5 million film. It's a science fiction horror comedy. It's about stopping an alien invasion. But we stop the alien invasion by the two lead characters, the two brothers, who have their own rifles. The last thing they do when this thing, it's an invasion of the world. And once they realize what's going on, they just run in, they grab their rifles, and they get in a car, and they join this kind of ragtag militia. These people are batshit. They're bat guano crazy. I am so sorry about that. That's just a common expression where I come from. Please forgive me.
We understand guano.
But they're bat guano crazy.
Yes.
And that's to show that the genius of this country is that you can have so many individual people who are driven by the same goal working together without this kind of top-down hierarchy. So there's no political message in this at all, other than to say, if you've got a couple of people going into an action situation with guns, that's conservative messaging. Now, here's something you can't take home with you. You get a guy like Matt Damon or these gun control guys or all these other guys, are big leftists. Yeah, we'll start with Matt Damon. He's a great example. And Matt Damon is a big old progressive leftist, big-time progressive leftist. But Matt Damon makes his money by being an individual man with a gun protecting a pretty woman from large, unseen forces of control. And that is not something you can argue with. I had this conversation once with somebody who was saying the power of the messages. If you don't understand the power of the culture, next time you see the next James Bond movie, imagine Daniel Craig heading out on a mission armed with a sternly worded letter from the United Nations and a committee of deeply committed people who are going to form a protest outside of a building. That's what he's going into, Javier Bardem's headquarters. I've got a letter from the United Nations here. And I think once you read it, you're going to realize just the kind of serious trouble you're in. Once you get down to brass tacks, it does come down to simple things like good-looking guy with a weapon defending a beautiful woman who's also bringing things to the game against forces of evil. These are inherently conservative, individualistic concepts, and that's why when they try to make movies about how great progressivism is, they fall flat on their face.
Well, and there's no fact to back it up. That's the other problem.
No. People know what heroism is. They know what individuality is. They know what courage is. And when you get down to the difference between the two camps, you can call them Republicans and Democrats, liberals, conservatives, you can call them anything you want to, but when you get down to brass tacks, it's, are you an individualist or are you a collectivist? And you don't see movies with collectivist heroes because people on a genetic level understand that heroism is an individual act.
Right. And so one place where conservatives consistently fall down, horribly.
Many places, but pick one.
One, politics in California.
Yeah, how about that?
Yeah. Horrible mess.
Yeah.
So the question is, you're an articulate, well-dressed man. George Washington caliber? I don't know. You tell me.
I'm not quite that good looking. But I'm in the ballpark, certainly.
So why not, instead of going straight for president, we've got a Senate opening coming up.
Yeah.
Barbara Boxer, gone. Have you thought about running for senator?
I could win that seat. I'd carry 80%. I'd carry 80% of this very, very progressive state. I would do it without question. I'm not going to do it, but I wouldn't have any problem with it.
So here's where we test your messaging chops.
Please.
What would you do to win that?
Well, first of all, I would point out how destructive what we call liberal policies are for the poor and the disadvantaged. They really do hate the sick and the weak and the poor. And the reason is best described by an analogy that my friend Dinesh D'Souza came up with. He basically said, look, well, first of all, I'd say things like this. I am 100% in favor of free health care for all Americans, 100%. What kind of a jerk would you have to be if you were opposed to giving free health care to people? You'd have to be genuinely evil. If I'd give all the free health care to people that there was to give. But unfortunately, health care isn't free. You have 4 guys in an operating theater, cardiac surgeons, and all of that equipment. That's not only not free, that's extremely expensive. So since health care isn't free, I can't just give it away. If it's not free, somebody has to pay for it. Now we have to start talking about who pays for it and what's the best way to pay for it. So when you say you'd have to be a complete jerk to be against giving away free health care, but health care isn't free. It's not free. If it was free, I'd be a progressive, but it's not. So since it's not, somebody has to pay for it, and now we're going to have a conversation about what's the best way to pay for it, and that conversation ends with a conservative victory. Because that conversation ends with the largest number of choices, the lowest level of administrative things. It's about you and picking a doctor you like. It's not about one-size-fits-all health care. It's coming from Washington, D.C. It's not about me taking a dollar that I could have given to the doctor and having the dollar go to Washington where they'll subtract 90 cents off of the dollar and knock 10 cents back for my health care. So when you say things like, of course I'm in favor of free health care. If health care were free, what kind of a jerk would you have to be to say, no health care for you, but it's not free, so you can't do that. But the Dinesh D'Souza analogy is really important. It's really clever. And basically what he said is, let's say that there's 100 people in the United States. Total population of America is 100 people. And let's grant that there are 10% of the people, 10 people, who for whatever reason can't walk. Whatever reason. They're either physically infirm, they have birth defects, they're old, they're very young, they're sick, they need help. There's not a person alive, certainly not a conservative alive, who says, no, let those people die in a ditch like a dog. Put them in a wagon, 10 people in a wagon, 90 people pulling, aces. And that's what this country was for most of its history. Now you get a guy who's got a blister on his foot, and it's a little uncomfortable walking. Yeah, I don't mind having that guy ride for a while. That's fine. But it's a little more fun to ride than to pull. So if it turns out now we got 15 people riding, we got 85 people pulling, right? And now if a guy goes up and down the line and says, I can get you in the wagon. All you have to do is vote for me. I can get you in the wagon. You don't have to walk again ever. I'll just write a little form that says you're got a permanent handicap or whatever. You get in the wagon. Now you got 70 people pulling 30 people. And you have 60 people pulling 40 people. And somewhere in this point, everybody who's doing the pulling says, I'm kind of a chump. If everybody's going to be in the wagon, I'm going to get in the wagon too. D'Souza's point is that when you put more and more people who should be producing into the receiving end, then eventually the wagon falls apart. The people doing the pulling stop pulling. Everybody gets in the wagon doesn't go nowhere. But the point is, the only people who really suffer are the 10% of the people who needed to be in the wagon in the first place. They're the ones who are getting hurt. Right. Everybody else can walk. The people who can't walk are now suddenly screwed because the rest of these progressives have told them, no, everybody get in the wagon, which means that the wagon falls apart because there's no one left to pull it. And the people that get hurt are the people who should have been in the wagon in the first place.
Right, right. Well, unfortunately, we're just about out of time, so tell us where people can learn more about you, the projects you're working on, and send you emails persuading you to use common sense and run for senator.
Well, thank you. It's pretty much everything I do is at BillWhittle.com. I was going to name it somebody else, and somebody said to me once, a marketing guy said, you know, you do a show called Afterburner, Firewall, Trifecta, Stratosphere Lounge. You know what these things have in common? No. None of them have your name on it. So we decided to go with BillWhittle.com, and everything I do there is there, and it's pretty much updated every day.
And it's spelled remarkably similarly to your name.
Exactly like my name.
Imagine that. Messaging. It's important.
There you go.
Well, thanks, Bill, for joining us again. If you'll hold on for just a moment, we'll be back after a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum.
The Conservative Forum of Silicon Valley began with 20 conservatives meeting at a restaurant in November of 2003. Our mission is to promote the principles of American liberty through education. By 2012, we had grown to over 600 paid members. Our monthly meetings feature well-known and prestigious conservative speakers addressing issues that are critical to our country's very survival. This includes speakers like Victor Davis Hanson, Andrew Breitbart, David Horowitz, and many others. In addition to our monthly meetings, we sponsor a conservative local cable access TV show, The Right Side, covering today's topics. Our Constitution discussion group not only teaches the Constitution, but started our annual essay contest that awards 2 $1,000 scholarships to local high school seniors. We are a virtual clearinghouse for grassroots organizations by providing them with table space at no charge in our exhibit area. There are typically a dozen groups represented. If you are like-minded, join us at our next meeting and become motivated and empowered. Liberty, made in America.
And welcome back to The Right Side. That was a word from our underwriters, the Conservative Forum. We were lucky enough to have Bill with us this evening because he'll be speaking there later tonight. But additionally, the speaker series is what the Conservative Forum is all about and what it's known for. We just happen to also benefit from their sponsorship, which we appreciate immensely. But if you look at what's coming up next, in February on the 10th, David Barton of Wall Builders will be speaking. In March, we're going to be joined by Dennis Michael Lynch, producer of They Come to America. And in April, on the 14th, John J. Miller will be doing the joint event with Hillsdale. And in May, a name that's well known within conservative circles, Alan West will be joining us, and that will be a packed house as well. You can learn more at theconservativeforum.com, or if you're in town on the second Tuesday of the month around 7 o'clock, you can join us at 432 Stearland Road, about 3 minutes from here, here in Mountain View. So we're glad to have Bill on the show again, and his message is so clear, it's so simple, but hard for conservatives to really ingest and take to heart, and that is, let's drop the facts, let's drop the figures, let's reach for the heartstrings, and let's make our topics of conversation actually interesting to people outside our circles and outside our heads. We have to boil our messages down to something that the 12-year-old mind can understand, because that's where TV's aiming at them and the rest of the media. If we want to be interesting to them, we've got to get to that level and get our message across cleanly. We've appreciated you joining us this evening. I've been your host, Chris Pareja. This has been The Right Side, and we look forward to seeing you in person or on the show sometime soon. Or if you just can't wait, reach out to us at therightsidetv@gmail.com. Have a great night.